Welcome back to Use Your Mouth after a brief rain break. Nice work. Now, conditions are still pretty slippery here though, and someone really needs to speak up about those loose cables.
Oh, commentator's curse.
All right, everyone, let's clear up this mess.
Yes, nicely dealt with. Now, your mouth really is a great bit of safety gear. Use yours to get talking.
Well, good morning, everybody. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. It is amazing to be in a room of 500 health and safety professionals, many of whom I know, so welcome back. Great to be with you this morning. Did you know that you need to focus 7 times as much on what's going right as you do on the things that are going wrong to make change? 7 times as much on what's going right as for every single thing that you talk about that is wrong. Why is that? Because we're naturally pessimists. So we will all focus on the things going wrong and we'll put our attention on that. So today I'm going to focus on what's going right in New Zealand and what is going to change us, because we are all about making a change in New Zealand around health and safety improvement. So there are 3 elements that I've been talking about as I do roadshows around New Zealand. I'm currently talking to directors around the country. And these 3 elements, I think, are the key elements that make up effective health and safety in New Zealand. And this is certainly where WorkSafe is focused at the moment. Those elements are leadership, risk management, and employee engagement. If I turn to the first of those elements, which is leadership, leadership starts at the top. Now, I heard the previous speaker talk about behaviours and actually the fact that organisations don't match what they say that they're doing. The key thing about leadership is that it's all about behaviours. It's not about beliefs or intent. So you might intend to be a good health and safety leader, but the only thing people will see is your behaviours. So leadership starts with behaviours, what you focus on, what you talk about, what you do day to day. And in terms of leadership, there is a formula for success. Lawrence Waterman, London Olympics, has previously spoken here, 2012, one of the most successful projects in the history of the world. There's also 2 examples that have won Safeguard Awards, Yugan Link and the Darfield Project, Fonterra Project, and the Canterbury Rebuild Charter. All of these programs of work, multi-year significant programs of work, they all had a success formula, and it started with leadership. And the leaders started with a thing called trust. And they said, we want to build trust. We want to build trusting relationships across our supply chain. Everybody involved in this program of work. Trust is the outcome, the input is care. So what does care look like? So leaders led at all levels. They had a high focus on care for people. People were at the centre. They established low hierarchy, high engagement cultures, and all parties were treated as equal. Everybody had a voice, and everybody's voice was listened to.
And I think one of the responsibilities of health and safety leaders is to make it easier for our people to be brilliant, so that we have less meetings saying, why won't the buggers work safely? How irritating is that? When people don't work healthily and safely and they get injured or their health is damaged, so they don't go home to their families in one piece, the only people that you need to look to are their leaders.
That project had a total TRIFR of 0.17 per 100,000 employees. That, at the time in the UK, there was a fatality rate of 2.2 per 100,000 workers. So the total recordable injury rate on that London Olympics build was well below the fatal injury rate in the UK at the time. That project, also the Darfield build, they delivered ahead of schedule, lower than budget, and operationally excellent, as well as achieving health and safety outcomes. And if you talk to Lawrence, or you talk to Yugan Link, who ran the Darfield build, or you talk to the Canterbury Charter group that set that up, all great leaders who are involved in that, they all say the same thing. The first thing they had to do was look at themselves. because the biggest problem was them as a leader. They weren't listening, they weren't paying attention to what people were talking about, and they were leading through rules and standards and hierarchy. They all said the biggest change was changing themselves. One of the great things in New Zealand, one of our competitive advantages as a nation, is our size means we can lead differently, and we are doing that in New Zealand. And we now have a number of New Zealand CEs and business leaders who've put their hands up and said, I want to step into this. I want to lead differently in health and safety. We now have peak health and safety leadership bodies with CE representatives at the table for the agricultural sector, for the construction sector, for the public sector, and also forest industry as well.
So the forest industry recognised that they had a health and safety problem, their performance wasn't where it should be, and they took ownership of that issue. They instigated an independent review, and from that they created the Forest Industry Safety Council, which is an independent leadership body made up of all the key stakeholders involved in the forestry sector. We've done a lot of work by the industry for the industry, brought together our own solutions in terms of certification and safety culture, and whilst we've still got a lot of work to do, those programmes are gaining traction, and again the leadership's behind those and the uptake within the industry is increasing.
So really importantly, if you talk to Gordon MacDonald, previous head of WorkSafe, and you look at what's happened in the UK, and they've had significant improvements in health and safety performance, particularly over the last 20 years, the one thing he said made the biggest change in that performance was when the industry started to lead the health and safety change. Not the rules, not the regulations, not the standards, the industry and the industry leadership, and you as leaders as part of that, taking ownership of the problem and leading differently was the single biggest change that drove health and safety performance in the UK, and we are primed to do that in New Zealand. So leadership. The second element is risk management. So leadership's absolutely critical. However, I mean, any of us that are in leadership roles know you get consumed by hundreds of competing priorities, and certainly being a CE myself, the demands on you from property to people to health and safety to finances are huge. So really, in the health and safety space, like everywhere else, you need to be focusing on the right stuff. In my roadshows, I talk about the right stuff in New Zealand being critical risks, key risks, critical risks, those things that can kill and seriously harm people. That message has been really well received. People have really liked that message. However, a number of people have gone, oh, it's really good, what she's talking about makes sense, but I have no idea what a critical risk is. That is particularly true for small to medium-sized businesses. And often these businesses are going, oh, this is really interesting, but I've got no history of having had any accidents, so I have no idea where to look for my profile of critical risks. Let me tell you that your past history of incidents and accidents when you're in the critical risk space has almost zero predictive value of your future likelihood of events. So you focus on TRIs, if you're focused on that, has almost got no correlation with reducing TRIs and reducing fatality rates. In fact, the relationship's often inverse. So looking at your history to determine your future, if you're in an industry that has a number of critical risks, is not particularly predictive. So how can we help with that? Well, there's some work that's been done on this. This work has been done by Chris Alderson. Chris Alderson works at PwC. He might actually be here today. Hi, Chris, if you are. Chris had a number of clients come to him and say, look, Nicole's talking about this critical risk stuff. It sounds interesting, but I have no idea where to start. So Chris went out and he went around the world and he tried to look for fatal data that could be used to determine risk profile by sector. And he went all over the world actually, and the only place he could find data publicly available was the US. And US publicises its fatal data, and he took the 88,000 fatal workplace deaths that were recorded since 2009, and he coded those by sector, industry and harm type. Now, Chris is a New Zealander, so he's coding that to relevant sectors in New Zealand. So this data is American data, but coded in a way that makes sense in New Zealand. From that data, you can go into any one of these elements. This is free, available free for people to use to determine their critical risk profile. You can go into any one of these sectors and you can see the types of incidents and harms that kill in those sectors. And you will see it also includes things like hazardous substance and some health exposures as well. So it's broader than just acute fatal harm. So if you're in the critical risk space or in a sector that is a little bit confused about what your profile might look like, this would be a really good place to start, and it includes service industries and other sectors that might otherwise not think they have a critical risk profile. You can start here. When you look at global fatality data, the really interesting thing is everywhere in the world the same things kill people. So the profile will be very similar. The only difference between the US and New Zealand is that the US has gunshot wounds higher in its profile relative to the rest of the world, and ATVs or quad bikes are lower for agriculture. But otherwise, this profile of what causes harm in the agricultural sector is exactly the same as New Zealand. Now, WorkSafe would really like to make this data available, so we are working on how we can do that. We're looking at putting it on our website. We also want to make our own data, our New Zealand fatality data, available, and we're working on doing that. So in the next 6 months to 12 months, you will see this available on our website as well. In the meantime, you can talk to Chris or send us a note and we'll flick you on the link to this material. When you're talking about risk management, don't forget catastrophic harm. So catastrophic harm is things that can, in a single incident, kill multiple people. I said, looking back to see what's happening going forward is not very predictive. Well, that's particularly true in the catastrophic space. So catastrophic is Pike River. Catastrophic is what destroys regulators. It also destroys companies. So this is an area to be very, very aware of if you're in charge of risk or health and safety for your business. This is a predictive model that WorkSafe has done on what is the likely catastrophic failures in New Zealand over the next 5-year period. To do this profile, we went out and we looked at OECD or relevant countries that are similar to us, and we looked at the profile of incidents. What this says is within a 5-year period in New Zealand, we're likely to have 2 structural collapses that kill multiple people, and you can go down here, but it's the second one is actually rail, and down the list as you go. People look at this and they go, hey, that's weird. We don't have those incidents in New Zealand. Now the reality is we do. So just think back to the last year, Onehunga. Does anybody remember the scaffold collapse? I think 5 people ended up in the water just about a year ago. Fortunately all walked away, but 5 people could have been dead. And every year in New Zealand we have university students on balcony collapses every year, and of course Cave Creek. And as you go down each of these things, you'll notice that they do occur in New Zealand. The green areas are the areas that WorkSafe directly regulates. So the other thing that's interesting to note here is a number of these areas are regulated in different places than WorkSafe. Importantly, when you're in this space, this catastrophic space, you need to manage it differently, and you do need to manage critical risks differently. Rob Jager, who's about to speak now, Rob has just received a Queen's Service Medal for services to health and safety. He's the chairman of Shell. He was the chair of the independent task force, and he talks about the importance of managing catastrophic and key risks differently.
Managing catastrophic risk is quite different to managing acute risk. And the reason for that is you don't get the benefit of all of the incidents and the learnings that come from the incidents. Catastrophic risk really depends on the systems and the processes, we call them barriers in our business, that collectively help you prevent major accident hazards. And you've got to make sure that those barriers are clear and effective and are tested on a regular basis to give you confidence that the catastrophic risk that is inherent in your business is well managed.
So leadership, risk management, and the most important, employee engagement and representation. So all is lost if the people exposed to the risk are not involved in managing and owning the risk. All is lost. It's a complete waste of time unless we are engaging the people involved in the risk and understanding and managing the risk and feeling like they can control their work environment. And that process is a very iterative process that takes time. It's a two-way process. All those bow ties on the shelf, they're useless if the guys don't actually understand the controls, for example. When we look at what works in this employee engagement area, I'm going back to trust, and the input to trust is care. Care for your people. What does care for your people look like? Well, it will look different depending on what your people are like, so you might need to talk to them. But in reality, the people that do this really well often talk about the same sorts of things. So I'm going to put up Shane Maxwell. Shane came up through the ranks. He's a forestry guy. He came off crewing. He's now just been awarded the Forestry Skilled Professional of the Year in Northland. And he talks about walking the talk, about doing what you say you will, about understanding what it's like for the guys on the ground, and about creating trust with the people that you work with.
Relationships and trust is the key to all health and safety out in the logging industry. Our main goal is to have more values and principles towards health and safety, and just to get our guys home safe every night, and that's our main goal.
Yeah, he is really widely respected. He's very modest, and we had trouble getting him to talk actually, but he is well known to spend a lot of his time with this crew, talking, engaging, actively being out there with the guys. And when you're in this employee engagement space, the other thing to really understand is there is not one size fits all. We learnt this when I was in Fonterra very, very clearly and personally when we created a standard and we rolled it out globally. And that standard was actually a fire standard. In New Zealand, everybody wanted to be consulted and we had to take ages getting everybody on board. New Zealand has the lowest power distance in the world and the highest individualism. So to get change in New Zealand, particularly with people that have come up through cultural backgrounds in New Zealand, you need to consult. You need to buy people into the why, and you need to get them to understand the change before you make the change. On China, on the other hand, the standard actually said there will be a fire, then you will do, X, Y, and Z fire drill. I got a phone call from China. I'm on the farm, Nicole. The guys have lit a fire. The standard said there will be a fire. That prompted us at Fonterra to do some work to better understand how the same message delivered on paper can be interpreted entirely differently given the culture that it's been implemented into. WorkSafe is also getting to understand this, and we know that you need to do things completely different depending on the culture you're putting your message into and then depending on the people you're engaging with. So some of the things we're doing at WorkSafe, we've got a number of programs where we're working with Marawiti, Ngāti Parahi pilot. We're in Ruatoria working with the local community there. We've got a program with Pacifica people in South Auckland, and we are translating a number of our codes of practice and other documents into Mandarin, as well as having a number of Mandarin speaking inspectors in Auckland in particular. Ensuring that you understand and engage with people from their cultural paradigm is as important as engagement itself. Standing in the shoes of those that you want to receive the message. Putting this all together, you need leadership, risk management, and engagement.
What we established in addition was you said we did boards. Now the way we established it was someone came up with a bright idea, worked on a site with it on one of our projects. It seemed to have a positive impact to generate feedback from the workforce, near miss reports or opportunities for improvement. And the leadership team adopted it and said everyone should do it. So you find something that's good, you assess it and work out that it is good enough, it's making an improvement, it's making a contribution, and you use your leadership program to get everyone to adopt it. So gradually you're ratcheting up the standards by continually looking for where good is appearing and get everyone to operate to that level.
So let's talk about the why. Why are we doing this? So New Zealand's actually going okay. We're going okay. we've made some pretty positive progress. So off our baseline year, we've made an improvement of 33% in fatal acute harm. So we're now down to 2.1 actually on a 3-year rolling, or 2.6. We had quite an uplift in traffic accidents or vehicle-related accidents last year per 100,000 workers. That is still significantly higher than the UK. They sit between 0.5 and 0.8 per 100,000 workers. And actually it's higher than Australia, who has been showing a very positive downward trend, particularly over the last few years. When you look at what actually causes fatalities in New Zealand, the primary cause of fatalities in New Zealand is vehicles. There is not a lot of things that cause harm in this acute category. Number one is vehicles, interactions with vehicles, interaction with forklifts. In this category last year, the transport, logistics and warehousing, we went from on average 6 deaths a year to 28 last year. So there was 28 deaths in this transport, logistics and warehousing, which is your traffic, interactions with traffic, vehicles, interactions with vehicles last year, followed by machinery or being caught in machinery, followed by falls from heights, forestry incidents, and the rest are around the edges. So let me ask you, what is the primary cause of death or harm in the agricultural sector in New Zealand? Sorry? Utes? Utes? Did I hear utes? Any other thoughts? Oh, nobody's been to my roadshow. You should be coming to my roadshow. All wrong, but I'll come back and talk to that in a second.
Welcome back to Use Your Mouth, and the two sides are now out in the middle.
There's the customary exchange of nods.
Now, changeable conditions here today, so choosing the right vehicle will be critical. And they're talking about that now. Yes, it looks like the tractor's going to get the call up.
Beauty.
Now, your mouth's a really great piece of safety gear. Use yours to get talking.
We are focused on vehicles because vehicles are a key cause of harm in the agricultural sector, but they're not the primary cause of harm. The primary cause of harm, or the biggest cause of harm, is chronic health exposures. And that is true probably in almost every sector in New Zealand. So on average, 65 people die of acute harm-related deaths in New Zealand each year. We know from work that was done in 2012 that between 600 and 900 people die each year in New Zealand from health-related exposures. The biggest cause of those health-related exposures is cancers. Within the cancers group, asbestos, silicosis, hazardous substances, and actually chemicals and exposure to chemicals is probably the biggest cause of death and harm in the agricultural sector in New Zealand. Also in the cancers category is sun. Also in the cancers category is shift work actually. A number of recent studies showing shift work is highly correlated with increased risk of cancers. And then you can see cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, etc. Now New Zealand is very, very early days in this whole health area. And we've got a tremendous amount of work to do, I think, to catch up and to understand and manage this area effectively. In Australia, and I've just been in Australia, mental health related issues are now the predominant claims, or sorry, not the predominant claim, they make up about 12% of the claims on the workers' comp system over there, and they are growing at 20 to 25% a year, where most of the other profile is dropping at so acute harm is going down, but mental health related issues are rapidly going and are predicted to be 20 to 30% of their claims profile by the year 2025 if that's not managed more effectively. Now, interestingly, with mental health, the average acute worker has, I think, somewhere like 4 weeks off work for a greater than a week off work incident. The average mental health related claim, we don't have claims, remember, in New Zealand, so this is just for relativity perspective, has over 6 months off work and almost none of them return to the same employer. So far more complex, far more disabling, and actually very, very concerning. And when they look at the reasons for that, people are bringing their health to work, and work is also impacting on health at home and other places. So psychosocial harm and mental health and how you manage health and wellbeing is an absolutely emerging area, and an area I think a number of New Zealand businesses are struggling with. I'm going to show you Peter Crisp. Peter Crisp is the CEO of the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, so he manages a team that works all over the world. He's also been he's been a CEO of a number of big operational private sector businesses in New Zealand. And I'm doing a talk series, and I've started with talking with him because he is actually an absolute leader in the health and safety space. He's passionate about it, he leads from the front. And what was really interesting is his perspective on health and wellbeing.
But I think what we're grappling with inside the wellbeing and the mental health is what to take responsibility for, because there's a lot of mental health issues originate from out of the workplace. Some mental health issues originate from within the workplace, but I think with mental health, you're actually you're extending your sense of responsibility beyond the boundaries of the workplace. And I kind of think as leaders, you have to be up for that. I don't think you can, that's what we're experimenting with. We can't put this artificial thing around us and say, we're the workplace, it's only what happens in here is our responsibility. We're actually dealing with whole people and whole lives. So that's the people who happen to work in the organisation.
Peter was really interesting because he actually said, I don't know how to deal with this. And I guess with many of these areas, my challenge and the opportunity, I think, for all of us is to find the people that are doing stuff and to learn from them. Because there is lots of people in the world, and I talk about the Australians or the UK or parts of Europe that are leading in this space. There's recent studies that have just come out of Harvard University showing that companies that integrate health, safety, wellbeing, and that includes things like insurances and care for their people into the way that they operate every day, outperform the US top 500 companies. So having health, mental health services and support for your people as part of the way you work is absolutely part of doing health and safety well and effectively. Which takes me to this. This is a cultural maturity graph. It's DuPont, an adapted DuPont tool. And I'm using this a lot, particularly when I talk to politicians and others, but also when I talk to boards, because I'm often talking to boards, and when I'm in the boardroom, they go, you know, I think I've made it really clear what needs to be done here. I've told them the standard is really clear. There's rules, and why are the people not following the rules? When I hear that, I'm going, where are we sitting, board? Where are we sitting? The reason I put this up here is I think we're on the start of a journey. I talked about what we're doing right. We've got people like you highly engaged in this topic, and there's more and more of you engaged in this topic, and many more CEs wanting to lead in this space in New Zealand. That's fantastic. But when you look at actually where we are, what the dialogue on the language of health and safety continues to be, much of it continues to be down here. And this was my predictive model, it's very non-statistical, of where New Zealand is in terms of the language we hear and see at WorkSafe and the types of things we focus on when we're talking to people. And we still hear a lot of, it's all about compliance, it's all about rules, it's all about, I have to put the guy through 20 induction programs because I don't have a way of working out how I can simplify that for people. There's a lot of that. And we still hear lots of people on our roadshows talking about bloody WorkSafe forcing me to put a scaffold in. What do you think the number one risk for a small business that does construction work would be? Death of the owner. Death of the owner, number one risk, and can't afford a scaffold to look after the owner or the number one worker. So part of the challenge to this group is we need to change the dialogue in New Zealand. This is not the language that we should be using around health and safety. So my challenge to you is to be honest about where you are on the spectrum, or your teams, or your sub-teams, or whoever you're working with. Because the first thing to understand is you can't go to the right-hand corner by going, I want to go there. That's where we're going to go, and I'm going to start talking that way. It takes a long time to get from here to there. And it usually starts with a conversation saying, this is a bloody pain in the ass, but I'll get some systems. And then you get systems, and then you got lots of systems, and then you end up with lots and lots of rules. And I heard our previous speaker talk about this. Lots and lots of rules, and more rules. And then you go, oh my God, this is too hard. The guys can't do it. When you're in that space, you're starting to move into here, where you start to actually go to the guys in front line, guys and girls, and say, actually, how do we do this? How does it make sense? What are you actually doing today? How do we simplify this? How do we make it easier for you? The challenge for all of us in this room is many of our boards and CEs are not thinking that way. So you need to lead this change, because they won't. They are not there yet. We need to help them move from here to there, and what we will focus on and what we pay attention to and how we go about that will be a big change in how we do things in New Zealand. So that's my challenge to you. Understand where you are, understand how you shift between these pieces. There's lots of information out there to help you talk, but find organisations that are each of these places and talk to them, because that's the easiest way to shift.
So as a task force, we of course talked about a step change in managing health and safety in this country, which was way overdue. And my reflection is that we're making good progress. I'm seeing lots of green shoots, and in fact I was honoured yesterday by the Governor General, and it, in my mind, reflects that health and safety is now clearly reflected more broadly. But we're not there yet. I don't think we've yet made the step change, and that's not surprising because the systems and the processes are still being put in place, and it takes time to change our behaviours and our views of this. But lots of green shoots, heading in the right direction, and I'm sure that within the next few years we can indeed talk about being the safest country in the world to go to work.